But the WWE's efforts to boost NXT's ratings by having Charlotte Flair as NXT Women's Champion have been a bust so far, as the Queen isn't drawing those all-important eyeballs to the set, and it's arguable she's hurt the once thriving NXT Women's division. Join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at WWE and its problem with Charlotte Flair. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos. Now, Charlotte Flair isn't the first main roster superstar to come to NXT with the goal of bringing in some fans to the black and gold brand. When NXT first began airing opposite Dynamite, there were rumours that several main roster talents would show up. However, the only one that came in and stayed was Finn Balor. Balor was a fan favourite from his time in NXT. He seemed like a good choice, but despite a heel turn, his first run in the WWE as a villain, he hasn't done much to pop the ratings. No matter what the WWE may say, it's clear the company wants to beat Dynamite in the ratings every week, otherwise why would they choose to air it on the same night and in the same time slot? However, NXT has only won the ratings battle on less than a handful of occasions, which has led some fans and analysts to argue that NXT just doesn't have the stars to compete against Dynamite. It may be a valid argument, but as we'll see, there are alternatives the WWE hasn't fully explored, and their latest effort to throw a main eventer into the mix hasn't exactly worked. Enter Charlotte Flair, arguably the best female wrestler from Raw or SmackDown, with a record 10 World Women's Championships to her credit. If WWE wanted to add some main event star power from the women's division, it's difficult to think of a bigger performer currently working than the Queen. It's a simple but often effective premise. Bring in a main eventer and get the fans watching its Wednesday night show and beat rival AEW Dynamite. So far, the ratings strongly suggest Flair hasn't helped NXT, and she may even be hurting it. Right now, the ratings are the only way to gauge viewers' interest, since there are no live events or NXT takeovers occurring. As always, advertisers and television programmers such as the WWE rely on the ratings to determine success, failure, or indifference. With ratings able to provide breakdowns on segments, it's even easier to see what is working and what isn't when it comes to individual stars. Sadly for Charlotte, the ratings haven't been there so far, and this dates back to even before she became NXT Women's Champion. Consider this report from 27th February when NXT was headlined by Charlotte vs Bianca Belair. Not only did Dynamite win the ratings again, this show was headlined by a weigh-in between Chris Jericho and Jon Moxley, but it failed to bring in female viewers compared to Dynamite. That Charlotte main event makes the more granular demographic ratings particularly shocking. In the youngest female demo reported by Showbiz Daily, females aged 12 to 34, Dynamite more than doubled NXT, posting a 0.13% rating to the WWE show's 0.06. This is a flip-flop from last week when NXT's 0.14% in that demo was 75% better than Dynamite's 0.08%. The idea, of course, is to see how the women of NXT perform against someone of the caliber of Flair. However, even after winning the NXT Championship, things haven't improved. During an episode of the Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave Meltzer reported on the ratings for the 29th April NXT, which featured Charlotte taking on NXT's Mia Yim. The Charlotte Flair-Mia Yim match was actually a low point. It did 170,000 in 18 to 49, which is dreadful. It was the second lowest point of the show, the Charlotte Flair match. That is a story because obviously it's Charlotte Flair, and she's there to put the numbers up, and there are people waiting to see if it'll work or not. With Io Shirai it may work, but with Mia Yim, obviously it did not. With ratings like this, NXT could do with less so-called help from the Queen. So far, Flair hasn't shown any evidence that she's helping the WWE's ratings on Wednesday evenings. At this point, it's safe to say that Flair hasn't helped the ratings, but why hasn't she? Arguably, the biggest reason is that Flair competing in NXT makes no sense. Why would a 10-time world champion return to the WWE's developmental territory? Massive apologies to Johnny Gargano for saying NXT isn't the main roster, but I'm sorry, this is not the main roster. If she decided to compete in NXT because there's no competition on Raw or SmackDown, what does that say about their women's division? On the surface, Flair going back to NXT is like a 6th grader going back to the 3rd grade to challenge themselves. Now, the WWE could have spun this story differently in order for it to make sense. The promotion could have had Flair to come to NXT arrogantly, claiming she was going to prove what losers NXT wrestlers are, only to be shown up. Another scenario could have seen Flair looking to prove something to an NXT star who showed her up during the NXT Invasion in 2019 or this year's Royal Rumble. They could have even brought in a different women's wrestler on the main roster who has been on a losing streak, head back to NXT, either thinking they could easily pick up wins or in some sort of journey to find their smile. They did this to a certain degree with Finn Balor, who returned to NXT to show who he truly is after floundering on the main roster. But that's not how WWE is handling Flair in NXT, and so far she's holding a title that's meaningless compared to the one she's held before. Not only that, but she used her Royal Rumble victory to go after a secondary title. Now, if she's there to put talent over in NXT, she hasn't done so yet. NXT's ratings have tanked even with her on the show. One concept the WWE hasn't grasped is that Charlotte is being booked like Brock Lesnar on NXT, with victory guaranteed regardless of whom she faces. While Flair doesn't dominate her opponents like Lesnar, there's little doubt as to who is leaving with their arm raised in victory. Now, NXT has shown that it doesn't need star power to win ratings. Consider the excitement the show generated when the WWE booked the NXT Invasion leading up to the Survivor Series. The idea of NXT stars on the main roster proved enough interest in NXT for fans to check things out on Wednesday nights. While there was the suspense of whether Raw or SmackDown stars would show up on NXT to respond to the invasion, it seems more that the exposure on the main roster was the impetus for interest in NXT, not the main roster stars on the secondary show. Based on how things worked out during the NXT Invasion angle, the WWE does better having NXT stars making guest appearances on Raw and SmackDown than putting Raw and SmackDown stars on NXT. Until they establish NXT as their third brand and not a developmental promotion, there's little if anything to be gained by having main roster stars show up working on the black and gold brand on a regular basis. It looks like a demotion or an attempt for wrestlers to find lighter competition, and there's no getting around these perceptions. If the WWE wants to use main roster talent, which is actually a good idea, the promotion should consider bringing in secondary champions to defend their titles on a routine basis, similar to how world champions visited territories during the days of the National Wrestling Alliance. When the NWA was made up of many different territories, each territory had a number of secondary titles, much as the WWE does with its Intercontinental and US Championships, as well as its tag team titles. The NWA World Champion would tour the territories, defending the title on special occasions, which was a big event. Why not have some of the WWE secondary title holders, such as the US Champion or one of the tag team champions, defend their belt on NXT? They did seem to toy with this idea when they had the Kabuki Warriors defend the Women's Tag Team Championship in NXT. When there's just one tag team title, why not have it defended across all three brands? The fans might be interested in seeing a main roster star come to NXT for a title defense, but there seems to be much less interest in a main roster star joining NXT. It's almost as if the main roster star becomes just another NXT performer when they jump ship. The idea behind world champions competing in the territories was about more than the added ticket revenue, or hear better ratings, that normally resulted from a world title match. Equally important was elevating regional talent by making them look strong against the best of the best, even if they lost. If the champion was a good heel, they might win by cheating, showing the regional star to be just as good, or if they were a babyface, the local hero might run out of time in the match. Either way, the local star looked to be close to or on the same level as the world champion. On rare occasions, the local star defeated the champion for the belt, which helped future ticket sales because fans never knew when they might see a title change. NXT has other problems as well. The shows at Full Sail University still look second rate to the arena shows, and while that's not a concern for any show right now, it's something the WWE will have to address in the near future. There are other problems as well, and while some of these are open to debate, one thing isn't. Putting top Raw and SmackDown stars on NXT hasn't helped. The idea of just plopping a top star into NXT has been a failure so far, and it might be the NXT's best interest to get the belt off Flair. Even a chase storyline might prove more interesting, as Flair counted on a long and easy reign only to be defeated. Her ruthless efforts to recapture the belt might be more interesting. Ultimately, Charlotte as NXT champion makes no sense. The WWE had several options for adding some sort of logic to Flair going back to where she started and competing for a belt that should be beneath her under normal circumstances. If Flair is booked as dominant, she's not helping NXT talent get over any more than Brock Lesnar has done in destroying opponents on a regular basis. WWE has a poor track record of using monsters to get over wrestlers, as seen with Roman Reigns' many battles with Lesnar and Seth Rollins' 2 victories over Lesnar in 2019. While Flair has worked hard to get her opponents over and put in strong performances, the booking has made these efforts useless. They need to fix this situation or drop it, but as we've seen with other flawed premises, that's unlikely to happen. But there you have it guys, WWE and its problem with Charlotte Flair. What do you think of this situation? What happens when Charlotte Flair actually drops the belt to an NXT star? Will she stay on the brand or will she fight to recapture it? Let us know in the comments down below, subscribe if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.